8. All right, so we're going to have the square root of 8 minus, what's our x1?
2.
2 squared, plus, what's our y2? 4 minus 3 squared. Good. What is 8 minus 2? 6. So we have 6 squared plus 1 squared. Good. What is 6 squared?
36.
And 1 squared?
1.
And together that is
37.
37. All right. Take the square root of that, round it to the thousandths. Always round to the thousandths. If I don't tell you what to round to, just like this one, your default is always thousandths. It's always 3 decimal places. All right. So I'll give you a moment to calculate that if you need it, and then we'll go on to the notes. So what we are looking for today are the midpoints and then an endpoint. That's what we're going to look for. Midpoint. Midpoint's made up of what 2 words? Midpoint is made up of what 2 words? Middle and point. It's your middle point. That's exactly what it is. It's your middle point. So when we talk about, the first vocabulary word we have is segment bisector. Anytime you see the word bisecting, doesn't matter what word's in front. This one right here. Bisector means to cut in half. If you cut something in half, if you cut it directly down the middle, what do you know about the 2 new things you've made?
30.
They should be equal. So same thing with bisector. If you know bisecting means to cut in half, something is now equal. So here, this is called a segment bisector. It does touch my midpoint, which happens to be this point right here. And what it does is it bisects or cuts your segment directly in half. And if you notice, it has these little tick marks right there that we talked about yesterday, right? What do the tick marks mean? That they're what? Equal, congruent. Congruent's the word we'll use. P to M and M to Q are of equal length now, okay? So we're going to be finding that midpoint, the point right in the middle. The way we do that is we take the average of the x's and the average of the y's. So the diagram here is just to show you how we get that with Pythagorean theorem. So here's a right triangle, and they're going to ask you for the length of this line segment, which happens to be the hypotenuse. So the formula says that if I take the side of A, if I take the y values and I add them and divide by 2, I can figure out what the y value is for that middle point. If I take the b value, add the x's and divide by 2, I can get the x value. That right there on the right side, that's our formula. And this formula is pretty easy to use when you're going straight forward. So if I ask for midpoint, I don't want anybody missing midpoint. It's pretty straightforward, okay? So I'm going to write the formula here again, okay? So midpoint means you're adding your x's and you're dividing them by 2. Same thing with your y's. All you're doing is adding, dividing by 2. Now, when you do this, you're going to find a new point, and this is the midpoint. This midpoint, sometimes we'll have it. And when we do, we're going to call it xm and ym. Why do you think I call it xm and ym?
Midpoint.
Because it's a midpoint, okay? And we'll use that when we get to, I think it's like example 2 or 3. But for the first one, we're just going to use the formula straightforward. So the question's asking, it says using the midpoint formula, find the coordinates of M, the middle point of S to T. So what are you looking for? You're looking for the M, which is the midpoint. Okay. When you see that, know you're using the formula straightforward. You're not changing anything. You're using that exact formula. Okay, so then I'm going to start off with my formula. M equals x1 plus x2 divided by 2. I'm just copying the formula. y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Okay? All I did was copy the formula. All right, like distance, I'm going to go through and label the points x1, y1, x2, y2. So x1, y1, x2, y2. All right, so the formula is just saying that we need to add the x's. What is your x1 and your x2?
-6 and 1.
All right, that's exactly what we're going to add. We're going to add -6 plus 1 divided by 2. All right, now we're going to do the y's. What are your 2 y's?
3.
3 and 0. So we're going to do 3 plus 0 divided by 2. And now we're just going to add. We're going to just add the numerator, okay? So what's -6 plus 1?
5.
-5 divided by 2. What about the next one?
3 over 2.
3 over 2. So I'm just carrying the denominator for now. Can you reduce or divide negative 5 over 2?
Yeah.
Well, I guess we could divide it. Is it a solid decimal? Do y'all get a nice solid, like it's not repetitive?
No.
We don't?
Yes.
We do? What do y'all get?
No, I should walk 20. No,
2.5.
2.5? All right, so you can either keep it like this, or you can say this is negative 2.5. What would 3 over 2 be? 1.5. So both of these could be answers for your midpoint. Now, if you keep it as a fraction, that's fine. Just make sure it's a reduced fraction. So just make sure they don't reduce anymore. Okay? All right, so this is all we're doing first, okay? So for your first practice, is all I'm asking you to do. All right, add your x's, divide by 2, add your y's, divide by 2. You found your middle point. All right, what do we plug in for the x values? 8 and negative 14?
Yes.
So 8 plus negative 14 divided by 2. What about your y values?
Negative 6 plus 3.
Negative 6 and 12. Negative 6 plus 12 divided by 2. All right, what was 8 plus negative 14?
Negative 6.
Negative 6 over 2. And what about negative 6 plus 12?
6 over 2.
Good. So does that reduce?
Yes. Negative 3, 3.
Negative 3, 3. Good. So do not leave it as negative 6 over 2 if you know it can reduce. Or if it can divide in this case. Okay? Good. That's going straightforward. You got 2 of these. No one should miss this. Right? Add your x's, divide by 2. Add your y's, divide by 2. Now let's get into the next part. So in the next part, if you read the question, it says find the coordinates of J if K is the midpoint of J to L and L has these coordinates. So are you looking for the midpoint on the next one?
No.
You're not. So what is happening is now you have the midpoint. Now you have this and you have one of these. The question is what's the other variable? So what we have to do is we have to figure out, well then how can I change my formula so that I can figure out what the endpoint is? Okay, so I'm going to erase this real quick. We're going to put it right here. All right, so I'm going to ask you, what did you use or what did you do to figure out the x value of the midpoint? What? Go ahead. How do we find the x value of the middle point? How did we find it? What did the formula have me do?
Divide by 2.
Divide what by 2? X1 and X2. Yeah, divided by 2. So all you're doing is you're going to split up these two equations. That's all you're doing. You're splitting them up. And you're telling me that it equals an exact coordinate or the value of the coordinates of the midpoint. So then here we're going to have ym equals y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And this is only when you're looking for an endpoint. That's the only time you do this. You do not have an endpoint. Okay, so back to our question. I gave you the midpoint. What was the midpoint? Negative 1, 2. It's K, right? So then because that is the midpoint, I want you to label that XM, YM. M because that's the midpoint. Your other point, we can go ahead and just label that X1, Y1. If you decide to do X2, Y2, that's fine. You'll just have, your equation would just be slightly different than ours, okay? Okay, once you have that, we're going to use these formulas we just came up with, okay? And all it is taking apart the midpoint formula. So I'm going to start with the X. XM equals X1 plus X2 divided by 2. All right, what did we label XM? Negative 1. What did we label X1? 3. Did we label anything X2? No, so you're just going to put X. You have to be looking for something. So here it happens to be this X. Okay, so then from here, how do I get rid of the dividing by 2 operation? Multiply by 2, good. So multiply this side by 2 and multiply this side by 2. What is 2 times negative 1?
Negative 2.
Negative 2, good. What happens with the 2's on the right side? They cross each other out. It actually just becomes 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 times any number is that number, okay? What do I have left on the right side? 3 plus x. Good. Now what do we have to do? Subtract the 3. So x is equal to -5. Good. We found the x. Now we have to figure out the y. Okay? So now let's do the y's. All right, so I'm going to do ym equals y1 plus y2 divided by 2. All right, I scooted down so I can't see my values. What is your ym? 2? Okay, I'm going to take your word for it. I can't see it. 2 equals, what's your y1? -5 plus y divided by 2. So it's the same thing. Same steps are going to happen. What was the first step I did after this? The next step I did after this? Multiply by 2. Good. So you multiply this side by 2, and you multiply this side by 2. What happens with those 2's?
They cross out.
They cross out. What is 2 times 2?
4.
And then we have -5 plus y. What's our last step?
9 equals y.
Add 5. 9 equals y. Good. What point was I looking for? We were looking for the coordinate of what? J. So we can say J is located at -5, 9. This would be your answer right here. So you can check your work, right? This was an endpoint. So technically what you could do is you can say, all right, I'm going to take this number and this one, and if I add them and divide by 2, I should get this as my outcome, because that's the middle point. If this is an endpoint and this is an endpoint, bless you, the average should give me the middle point. All right, I'm going to leave this up. If you want to, or if you can, flip over. I'm going to have you try one of these without me. Okay, so it says find the coordinates of G if P is the midpoint of E to G, for E is at -8, 6, and P is at -5, 10. So my first question is, what is your midpoint? What's your midpoint? P is. So then what do I label point P? XM? XM, YM, good. Because you have to have an M when you're working backward. And then your -8, 6, we're going to label X1, Y1. Our first formula, right, which is XM equals X1 plus X2 divided by 2. What did y'all plug in for XM? -5. So this should be -5 equals -8 plus X, good, divided by 2. Then what do we do?
You multiply by 2.
Multiply by 2, and that gives us,
-10 equals -8 plus x.
good. Your 2's should cancel out here. From here, what do we do?
Add
Add the 8. So X has the value of
2.
-2. All right, those are your X's. All right, now the important thing was that labeling. If we didn't label it correctly, then we put things in the wrong spot. All right, so then your YM is equal to Y1 plus Y2 divided by 2. What'd y'all plug in for YM?
10.
10 is equal to,
6 plus y.
then?
Divide by 2. Then multiply by 2.
Then multiply by 2, good.
Divide by 2.
All right, 2 times 10 is
20.
20. Your 2's cancel out. What's our last step?
-6.
-6. And Y is 14, correct.
Yeah.
What point were you looking for? G. So your answer in your box on your homework will be G is equal to, or is at point -214. That's the coordinate for G. Now, the next one is a word problem. Please don't skip over them. This one's pretty straightforward. My question to you is going to be, so it says, I'm planning on buying a bird bat to place in the middle of my garden. My garden is an oval, and when drawn on a coordinate plane, the ends of the widest sides are located at the following points. Where should I place the bird bat? What's the key word here? Middle. Middle of the garden. That was the key part right there. So that means we're looking for a midpoint. And that's the one where all you do is add your x's, add your y's, and divide by 2. That's all we're doing. Add your x's, add your y's, divide by 2. All right? And with this one, you really don't have to label. You can just pick out your x's, pick out your y's. What are your x values?
-7 and 5.
-7 and 5. All right. So -7 plus 5
-2.
divided by 2. What are the y's?
-2 and 6.
-2 and 6 divided by 2. All right. So what is -7 plus 5?
-2.
-2 divided by 2. And what's -2 plus 6?
4.
4 divided by 2. Do they reduce?
Yes.
Yes. What is -2 divided by 2?
-1.
And 4 divided by 2?
2.
It should be placed at point -1, 2. That's your answer. So the last part we're going to talk about is midpoint, but not in regards to coordinates. If I'm standing on this end and another teacher's standing on the other end of the hall and I say, hey, let's meet at the midpoint of our hallway, did either one of us walk farther than the other?
No.
No. We should walk what?
Same distance.
Same distance. Okay, so just like bisecting means to cut in half, so does midpoint. So anytime you see the word midpoint, something is equal. All right, so this is segment P to R, so I'm going to draw P and R. And I'm going to place Q right in the middle because that's my midpoint. What can I say about P to Q and Q to R? They're the same, right? I'm point P. Ms. Vivas next door is point R. If we walk, we should both meet at point Q, so we walk the same distance. So, what word did I tell you we used to say they're the same? Congruent. So I'm going to say P to Q is congruent to Q to R. We know that just from that one word. I was able to draw that all with that one small statement, and that's what we have to be able to do. Okay? So we answered the first part. Second part says, if P to Q is this equation and Q to R is this one, what is the length of P to R? So when we say something is congruent, we just said that that means they're what again? The same. Or that they're equal. So in here, you'll hear me say, if it's equal, set it equal. That means if you know they're equal, literally put an equal sign between them. All you're doing is changing this symbol to be an equal sign. That's all you're doing. The equal sign means we can go ahead and substitute in equations. And we have equations here. What equation do I have equal to P to Q? 9y minus 2. So I'm going to plug that in for Q, P to Q. 9y minus 2. What do I have equal to Q to R? 14 plus 5y. And now you can solve it. So there are some cases on the test that you guys may want to add them and set them equal. But a lot of times, they're just supposed to be equal to each other. Okay? All right. All right. There's the algebra, so I'm just going to go through it. Let's subtract 5y. 4y minus 2 equals 14. Add the 2. 4y equals 16. What's our y value? What's our y value? 4. All right, y value should be 4. Okay, but I didn't ask for y, right? The question was, what is the length of P to R? And I don't even have an equation for P to R. What do you think we can do to figure out the length from P all the way to R? What can I add? You're right, we could add. What could we add?
4.
Not just 4, though. I know y is 4.
The constant?
No. Can you figure out what the actual length of P to Q is? Can we figure out that actual distance between the letter P and Q?
Replace the y with 4.
Replace the y with the 4. So if P to Q is 9y minus 2, you're going to substitute in that 4. So what is 9 times 4?
36.
36 minus 2 is
34.
34. All right. So we found P to Q, which is not what I'm asking for, right? So P to Q is 34. So I know this is 34. Do you have to do the work for Q to R? No, because what do we know about P to Q and Q to R? They're the same. So then to figure out P to R, what do I have to do?
Multiply by 2.
Multiply by 2 or add it to itself, whatever you want to do. P to R is equal to
68.
68. Okay, I'm going to make this very clear. We had to show a lot of work for this one problem. If you have one of these on your homework, do not come with one statement telling me that that's all your work. Because we had to do all this as a class. There were 3 steps here. 3 things we had to do. 4 if you count the picture. Okay? So make sure you show your work. All right, I'm going to do 4 with you. 4, usually I have the problems the same or just slightly different. So I'm going to show you how sometimes it can be slightly different. So it looks the same, right? You're looking at it, you're like, yeah, it's going to be the same problem. But then you read it, and it says, find the measure of P to R if Q is the midpoint. That part's the same. So we're going to draw P to R. So here's P, here's R, and what's in the middle? Q. And if Q's in the middle, what's equal? PQ and QR. All right, so I put my tick marks there. The first question, though, is not what do I know, it's how much bigger is P to R than P to Q. So here's P to R, and here's P to Q. How much bigger is my pink line than my blue line? How much bigger is it? Twice. The pink one is double the length of the blue one. Double the length. And that's what I'm going to write. So I'm going to say my pink one, what's the name of my pink line? P to R is, that's my equal sign. My is my equal sign. P to R is how much bigger than the smaller one? So 2 times as big as, what's the name of the small one? P to Q. Y'all have to be able to write out statements like this. This is going to then help us on the next part. So this is what I know. I know P to R is twice as big as P to Q. So now I can go into the substitution piece. So if I know this, what am I plugging in here? What am I plugging in for P to R? 14x plus 2, that's what it equals. 2 times, I'm going to plug something in here, so I'm going to put the parentheses. What is P to Q equal to? QR, right? I don't have P to Q. I did not have an equation that had P to Q, but I know P to Q is equal to Q to R.
6 minus 3x.
And it is Q to R. So we're going to do 6 minus 3x. Good. So what am I going to do on the right side?
Multiply by 2.
Good. What is that called? Distribute. All right, let's go ahead and move over the 6x. How many x's do I have? How many x's? 14 plus 6.
20.
20. All right, so this is the part we have to get pretty quick on, okay? All right, move over the 2. What do we get?
10.
10. All right, and then what would be our last step? Divide by 20 or divide by 10?
20.
20. I put that there on purpose, and you were going to say 10. It's supposed to be 20 down there. It's not letting me write down there. What is our x value?
0.5.
Not the answer, right? Not the answer. Okay, I want to know the length of P to R and P to Q. I don't have P to Q, but what do we say again? P to Q is equal to? Q to R. So I can just start with Q to R. Q to R is 6 minus 3x. And we know x is 0.5. So what's 3 times 0.5? 1.5. Okay, so what's 6 minus 1.5? 4.5. Good. You know Q to R, which you also know P to Q. Good. You got your answer there. The last one is P to R. If Q to R and P to Q are both 4.5, how do I find the length from P all the way to R? Times it by 2. Good. What's 2 times 4.5?